primary cause of disorder in ourselves is the seeking of reality promised by another. We mechanically follow somebody who will assure us a comfortable spiritual life. If we completely reject, not intellectually but actually, all so-called spiritual authority, all ceremonies, rituals, and dogmas, it means that we stand alone and are already in conflict with society. We cease to be respectable human beings. When you step out of the trap of respectability, then you will find that you are no longer seeking. That is the first thing to learn, not to seek. When you seek, you are really only window shopping. Nobody and nothing can answer your questions but you yourself, and that is why you must know yourself. The whole history of the human is written in ourselves. Do you observe what is actually taking place within yourself and outside yourself, in the competitive culture in which you live with its desire for power, position, prestige, name, success, and all the rest of it? Observe the achievements of which you are proud. This whole field you call living, in which there is conflict in every form of relationship, breeding hatred, antagonism, brutality, and endless wars. Can society based on competition, brutality, and fear come to an end? Not as an intellectual conception, not as a hope, but as an actual fact, so that the mind is made fresh, new, and innocent, and can bring about a different world altogether. We are each one of us responsible for every war because of the aggressiveness of our own lives, because of our nationalism, our selfishness, our gods, our prejudices, our ideals, all of which divide us. We have been told that all paths lead to truth. When you look at it, it is so obviously absurd. Truth has no path, and that is the beauty of truth. It is living. A dead thing has a path to it because it is static. But when you see that truth is something living, moving, which has no resting place, then you will see also that this living thing is what you actually are. So you see, you cannot depend on anybody. There is no guide, no teacher, no authority. There is only you. When you realize this, it either brings great despair, or in facing the fact that you and nobody else are responsible for the world and for yourself, for what you think, what you feel, how you act. All self-pity goes. Normally, we thrive on blaming others, which is a form of self-pity. It seems to me that all ideologies are utterly idiotic. What is important is not a philosophy of life, but to observe what is actually taking place in our daily life, inwardly and outwardly. If you observe very closely what is taking place and examine it, you will see that it is based on an intellectual conception, and the intellect is not the whole field of existence. It is a fragment. And when we look at what is taking place in the world, we begin to understand that there is no outer and inner process. There is only one unitary process. It is a whole, total movement. The inner movement expressing itself as the outer, and the outer reacting again on the inner. If I were foolish enough to give you a system, and if you were foolish enough to follow it, you would merely be copying, imitating, conforming, accepting. And when you do that, you have set up in yourself the authority of another, and hence there is conflict between you and that authority. In trying to conform to the ideology, you suppress yourself. Whereas what is actually true is not the ideology, but what you are. If you try to study yourself according to another, you will always remain a second-hand human being. Can you reject all authority? If you can, it means you are no longer afraid. Then what happens? But when you have thrown it off and have this energy in which there is no fear at all, no fear of making a mistake, no fear of doing right or wrong, then is not that energy itself the mutation? We need a tremendous amount of energy and we dissipate it through fear. But when there is this energy which comes from throwing off every form of fear, that energy itself produces the radical inward revolution. You do not have to do a thing about it. And where there is freedom, there is energy. Freedom is entirely different from revolt. You are free, and from that center you act. And hence there is no fear, and a mind that has no fear is capable of great love. And when there is love, it can do what it will. When we look at ourselves with the dead authority of yesterday, we will fail to understand the living movement and the beauty and the quality of that movement. To be free of all authority of your own and that of another is to die to everything of yesterday, so that your mind is always fresh, always young, innocent, full of vigor. And to take such a journey, we must travel light. We cannot be burdened with opinions, prejudices, and conclusions. Forget all that you know about yourself. Forget all that you have ever thought about yourself. We are going to start as if we knew nothing. It rained last night heavily, and now the skies are beginning to clear. It is a fresh new day. You have to be your own teacher and your own disciple. Why are you frightened of being alone? Because you are faced with yourself as you are, and you find that you are empty, dull, stupid, ugly, guilty, and anxious. A petty, shoddy, second-hand entity. Face the fact. Look at it. Do not run away from it. The moment you run away, fear begins. Understanding is not an intellectual process. Acquiring knowledge about yourself and learning about yourself are two different things, for the knowledge you accumulate about yourself is always of the past, and a mind that is burdened with the past is a sorrowful mind. Learning is a constant movement without the past. Each of us has an image of what we think we are, or what we should be, and that image, that picture, entirely prevents us from seeing ourselves as we actually are. The moment you have achieved anything, you cease to have that quality of innocence and humility. The moment you have a conclusion or start examining from knowledge, you are finished, for then you are translating every living thing in terms of the old. Whereas if you have no foothold, there is no certainty, no achievement, there is freedom to look, to achieve. And when you look with freedom, it is always new. A confident man is a dead human being. How do you know you are conditioned? You respond to every challenge according to your conditioning, and your conditioning being inadequate will always react inadequately. It is only when you see the conditioning and the danger of it immediately, as you would see a precipice, that you act. So seeing is acting. The moment you give your total attention to your conditioning, you will see that you are free from the past completely, that it falls away from you naturally. When you become aware of your conditioning, you will understand the whole of your consciousness. Attention is not the same thing as concentration. Concentration is exclusion. Attention, which is total awareness, excludes nothing. A mind which is not crippled by memory has real freedom. Thought is never new, for thought is the response of memory, experience, knowledge. If you can look at all things without allowing pleasure to creep in, at a face, a bird, the beauty of a sheet of water shimmering in the sun. If you can look at it without wanting the experience to be repeated, then there will be no pain, no fear, and therefore tremendous joy. It is the struggle to repeat and perpetuate pleasure which turns it into pain. When you don't get what you want, you become anxious, envious, hateful. You are afraid of not getting what you want, or of losing what you have. Where there is a search for pleasure, there must be pain. If you want to end pleasure, which is to end pain, you must be totally attentive to the whole structure of pleasure. But seeing the whole meaning and significance of pleasure, then you will have tremendous joy in your life. You cannot think about joy. Joy is an immediate thing, and by thinking about it, you turn it into pleasure. Living in the present is the instant perception of beauty, and the great delight in it without seeking pleasure from it. The craving for position, for prestige, for power, to be recognized by society as being outstanding in some ways, a wish to dominate others, and this wish to dominate is a form of aggression. And what is the cause of this aggressiveness? It is fear, isn't it? One of the major causes of fear is that we do not want to face ourselves as we are. The movement from certainty to uncertainty is what I call fear. At the actual moment, as I am sitting here, I am not afraid. But beyond the actual moment, there is a deeper layer in the mind which is consciously or unconsciously thinking of what might happen in the future, worrying that something from the past may overtake me. Now take your own particular form of fear. Look at it. Watch your reactions to it. Can you look at it without any movement of escape, justification, condemnation, or suppression? Thought is always old because thought is the response of memory, and memories are always old. Thought creates in time the feeling that you are afraid, which is not an actual fact. The actual fact is that you are well. Is it possible for the mind to live completely, totally in the present? It is only such a mind that has no fear. But understand this, you have to understand the structure of thought, memory, and time. And in understanding it, understanding not intellectually, not verbally, but actually with your heart, your mind, your guts, you will be free from fear. Then the mind can use thought without creating fear. Thought is the response to memory, memory which has been accumulated through experience, knowledge, tradition, time. And from this background of memory, we react, and this reaction is thinking. One of the functions of thought is to be occupied at all time with something. Most of us want to have our minds continually occupied so that we are prevented from seeing ourselves as we actually are. We are afraid to be empty. We are afraid to look at our fears. There is only one desire. There is only desire. You desire. The objects of desire change, but desire is always the same. So perhaps in the same way, there is only fear. You are afraid of all sorts of things, but there is only one fear. When you realize that fear cannot be divided, you will see that you have put away altogether this problem of the subconscious that have cheated the psychologists and the analysts, when you understand that fear is a single movement which expresses itself in different ways, and when you see the movement and not the object to which the movement goes, then you are facing an immense question. How can you look at it without the fragmentation which the mind has cultivated? We see that the mind can look at this total fear only when there is no movement of thought. When you say, I must control it, I must get rid of it, I must understand it, you are trying to escape from it. If you merely look at the details of fear or try to deal with your fears one by one, you will never come to the central issue, which is to learn to live with fear. To live with a living thing such as fear requires a mind and heart that are extraordinarily subtle, that have no conclusion and can therefore follow every movement of fear. If you live with it so completely, you will inevitably ask, who is the entity who is living with fear? Who is it who is observing fear? The observer is the censor who does not want fear. The observer is the totality of all his experiences about fear. So the observer is separate from that thing he calls fear. There is space between them. He is forever trying to overcome it or escape from it. Hence this constant battle between himself and fear. As you watch, you learn that the observer is merely a bundle of ideas and memories, without any validity or substance. The observer is fear, and when that is realized, there is no longer any dissipation of energy in the effort to get rid of fear, and the time-space interval between the observer and the observed disappears. When you see that you are a part of fear, not separate from it, that you are fear, and you cannot do anything about it, then fear comes totally to an end. Fear, pleasure, sorrow, thought, and violence are all interrelated. Most of us take pleasure in violence, in disliking somebody, having antagonistic feelings towards others. But in a state of mind in which all violence has come to an end, there is a joy which is very different from the pleasure of violence with its conflicts, hatreds, and fears. Can we go to the very root of violence and be free from it? Otherwise, we shall live everlastingly in battle with each other. I don't want to have a breath of hate, jealousy, anxiety, or fear in me. I want to live completely at peace. Violence is not merely killing another. It is violence when we use a sharp word, when we make a gesture to brush away a person, when we obey because there is fear. Violence is much more subtle, much deeper. Can I look at you if I am antagonistic to you, or if I am thinking what a marvelous person you are? I can see you only when I look at you with a certain care, in which neither of these things is involved. The man who is really serious with the urge to find out what truth is, what love is, has no concept at all. He lives only in what is. In our relationships, each one of us builds an image about the other, and these images have a relationship, not the human beings themselves. The actual relationship between human beings completely ends when there is the formation of images. Poverty is to be completely free of society. One must become poor inwardly, for then there is no seeking, no asking, no desire, no nothing. It is only this inward poverty that can see the truth of a life in which there is no conflict at all. All stimulation, whether of the church or of alcohol or of drugs, or of the written or spoken word, will inevitably bring about dependence, and that dependence prevents us from seeing clearly for ourselves, and therefore from having vital energy. Why is there this urge to depend? Because in myself I am shallow, in myself I have nothing, in myself I have no source, which is always full and rich, vital, moving, living, so I depend. I have discovered the cause. What frees the mind from dependence is seeing the whole structure and nature of stimulation and dependence, and how that dependence makes the mind stupid, dull, and inactive. Seeing the totality of it alone frees the mind. As long as I am looking at life from a particular point of view or from a particular experience, I cannot see totally. I have discovered intellectually, verbally, through analysis, the cause of my dependence, but whatever thought investigates must inevitably be fragmentary, so I can see the totality of something only when thought does not interfere. Then I see the fact of my dependence. I see actually what is. I see it without any like or dislike. There is what is only when there is no comparison at all, and to live with what is to be peaceful. Then you can give your whole attention without distraction to what is within yourself. Whether it be despair, ugliness, brutality, fear, anxiety, loneliness, and live with it completely, then there is no contradiction and hence no conflict. Trying to become like somebody else or like your ideal is one of the main causes of contradiction, confusion, and conflict. A mind that is confused, whatever it does at any level, will remain confused. Any action born of confusion leads to further confusion. I see this very clearly. So what happens? I cease to act in terms of confusion anymore. Therefore, inaction is complete action. To come upon truth, the mind must be completely free, without a spot of distortion. Freedom comes only when you see and act, never through revolt. The seeing is the acting, and such action is as instantaneous as when you see danger. Freedom is a state of mind, not freedom from something, but a sense of freedom, a freedom to doubt and question everything, and therefore so intense, active, and vigorous that it throws away every form of dependence, slavery, conformity, and acceptance. Such freedom implies being completely alone. This solitude is an inward state of mind which is not dependent on any stimulus or any knowledge, and is not the result of any experience or conclusion. Most of us inwardly are never alone. There is a difference between isolation, cutting oneself off, and aloneness, solitude. We all know what it is to be isolated, building a wall around oneself in order never to be hurt, never to be vulnerable. You are never alone because you are full of all the memories, all the conditioning, all the mutterings of yesterday. Your mind is never clear of all the rubbish it has accumulated. To be alone, you must die to the past. When you are alone, totally alone, not belonging to any family, any nation, any culture, any particular continent, there is that sense of being an outsider. The man who is completely alone in this way is innocent, and it is this innocence that frees the mind from sorrow. We carry about us with the burden of what thousands of people have said in the memories of all of our misfortunes. To abandon all that totally is, to be alone, and the mind that is alone is not only innocent but young. not in time or age, but young, innocent, alive at whatever age, and only such a mind can see that which is truth and that which is not measurable by words. In this solitude, you will begin to understand the necessity of living with yourself as you are, not as you think you should be or as you have been. To live with something like jealousy, envy, or anxiety, you must never get used to it, never accept it. You must care for it as you would care for a newly planted tree, protect it against the sun, against the storm. You must care for it, not condemn it or justify it, therefore you begin to love it. When you care for it, you are beginning to love it. It is not that you love being envious or anxious, as so many people do, but rather that you care for watching. Can we live with all, neither accepting nor denying, but just observing without becoming morbid, depressed, or elated? Is this freedom, this solitude, this coming into contact with the whole structure of what we are in ourselves? Is it to be come upon through time? Is freedom to be achieved through a gradual process? Obviously not, because as soon as you introduce time, you are enslaving yourself more and more. You cannot become free gradually. It is not a matter of time. It can only come about freedom naturally, not through wishing, wanting, or longing. To come upon it, the mind has to learn to look at life, which is a vast movement without the bondage of time. For freedom lies beyond the field of consciousness.